I recently did a video recommending some horror films on Shudder, which is a streaming service that specialises in horror films. As I said in the previous video, my list of recommendations for Shudder is so long, so I thought I would do a part 2 to get some more of them out there. Shudder is always adding new films to their platform and they have some pretty decent Shudder originals, so I think I'm going to start with a 2025 release, a film that has just come out, and that is the film The Dead Thing. A woman finds a connection with a man after their first date. They hit it off and spend lots of time together until one day she can't get hold of him. As I said, this is a recent release and I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. I watched this because I saw Queer Demon talk about it on Instagram, and with it being a new release, I knew I just had to check it out. I would say this is definitely a psychological horror as well as being paranormal. It has some really sad moments. It honestly got to me at times. I really like the trope of first dates in a horror film, especially when you know that something is going to go wrong. It reminds me of films like Fresh, which I absolutely love. I think The Dead Thing can be interpreted in different ways. I've seen a lot of people talk about how it is a metaphor for toxic relationships, which I really can see, especially on ghosting and pursuing somebody who just might not be the right person. I have seen mixed reviews for this film, but personally I thought it was really enjoyable. It's definitely one that worked best going straight to streaming. My next recommendation is a film called Hypochondriac. A man who works as a potter begins to lose function in his arms. He is struggling physically and then mentally when he is haunted by a manifestation of his childhood traumas. This was another recent watch for me. It had been on my watch list for a little while. I think the thing that really drew me to this film was the poster because it looked absolutely terrifying. I'm so glad that I got around to watching this film because I ended up loving it so much. I went straight to look to buy it on physical, but unfortunately the cheapest I could find it was for £22, and that is slightly out of my budget for physical media. Hypochondriac is like if the films Possum and Donnie Darko had a queer baby, but with the horror ramped up. It wasn't as disturbing or as hard of a watch as Possum for me, but this still isn't an easy watch. It's about trauma, it's extremely sad at times, like really heartbreaking. It is disturbing and gut-wrenching, but it is also incredible and a film that I would recommend to so many people. The portrayal of trauma in this film is done perfectly and really tastefully, in my opinion. The main character, Will, takes us on a journey through his childhood trauma which resurfaces and how horribly it affects him later in life. As a watcher, you do really feel connected to his character and you do feel like you're going on this journey and going through all these emotions alongside of him. Just seeing how it affects his everyday life, his relationships, his job, his sense of who he is, and how it is turning him into someone who he wouldn't even want to be. I will probably be thinking about this film for months. The character, of course, wouldn't be anything without the incredible acting, actually bringing the character to life. Not even just the main actor, it was all round a really great cast. The physical manifestation of Will's trauma was absolutely terrifying. I got jump scared a few times and I was hiding behind my blanket for some of the film. My next recommendation is Midnight. A serial killer targets and relentlessly chases a deaf girl after she witnesses him go after another young girl. This killer won't give up until he has caught her. The beginning of this film is super engaging and had me hooked, and then the middle of the film happened. I really am in two minds with this film. There were times when I was watching it and I was thinking this is incredible, and then there were other times where I was watching it and I thought some parts were a little bit boring or just straight up ridiculous. My main problem with this film is that the characters had zero common sense and there was a lot of plot holes. It was quite frustrating to watch at times. I did really enjoy the ending as well as the beginning though. There are a lot of chase scenes and one scene near the end of the film that was really quite far-fetched for me, but I do think having a few days to reflect on the film, I feel like it could have been intentional. I think maybe that the frustration we feel as audience members watching this film is kind of a representation how deaf people can feel so frustrated and so isolated even being in a crowd because of how lonely it is and how hard it can be for deaf people, to communicate with people who just don't even want to try to understand them. Midnight is beautifully shot, and I really love the characters, especially the mother-daughter relationship, despite their poor choices and questionable actions. I think this film is smarter than it seems on surface level. It's really important to see deaf representation in horror films and in films in general, especially as people with disabilities aren't usually written as main characters. This film is definitely worth a watch, and it is worth sitting on and giving it a few days to really gather your thoughts. The next film is one that is a little bit more well known, and that is Host. 6 friends decide to hang out over Zoom during lockdown. They hire a medium to join their call for a bit of fun. Unfortunately, this decision ends up being anything but fun when an evil spirit is unleashed into their homes. This is a found footage film. I really love found footage, especially the ones that are set over a computer screen, which is what this one is. I actually didn't love this film on first watch. This film centers around lockdown. I was just over anything to do with lockdown, as well as being set in that time. It was also filmed during lockdown, so all the actors were able to film their parts at home. But the really impressive thing is that all the actors also did all of their own effects at home. I have seen this film on a few lists of scariest horror film. It's either this one or Sinister usually. For me personally, I didn't find this one too scary, but I definitely can see where people are coming from, especially with found footage. I think found footage is definitely one of the scariest subgenres because it obviously seems so much more real. Host is a shorter horror film at only 67 minutes long. My next recommendation is When Evil Lurks. Set in a remote village, we follow 2 brothers who find a very interesting and disturbing discovery. They decide to cover it up, but this only spreads further chaos. This one is a disturbing film, so if you are sensitive to any topics, then please look up trigger warnings before watching. The same with any of the films that I recommend, especially this one because it is a little bit more on the extreme side. It definitely isn't a light-hearted film in the slightest. It's very gory, very messed up, but it is very creative. If you're looking for something a bit more brutal and a bit more intense than my other recommendations, then this film may be for you. In contrast, it is shot really beautifully and really thoughtfully. It has some clever shots and details that are easily missed if you aren't paying full attention. Some of the characters are a bit annoying and will probably drive you nuts because they make some stupid decisions and lack common sense and just don't listen to people when they say not to do something. I did find between the action a little bit boring at times, but it does make up for it with how entertaining and how intense the rest of the film is. I personally do want to revisit this one soon because it is really unique and it would definitely make you feel something. Next is VHS 85. This is the 6th installment in the VHS franchise. They are all anthology films. This one is my favourite because it's set in the 80s and I just really enjoy some of these shorts. There are 5 separate stories within this film and the first and the third are my favourites. I'm not going to go into what each of the shorts are about because it's best to go in blind anyway, and I don't want this video to be just about those, but maybe I could do a separate video on all of my favourite shorts from the VHS franchise and actually talk in detail about those ones. I love horror anthologies because even if you aren't loving the story, at least you know it's going to be something else soon. I think this type of film is also really good for busy people because if you don't have much time, then watching an anthology means that you can just watch one of the shorts and then pick it up another time. The VHS franchise isn't my favourite, but they are really fun and it's cool to have a ongoing franchise of anthologies. There is another one coming out this year called VHS 8. They are all called different things, but this one is actually the 8th installment. It does make me think of this review on Letterboxd. It's literally one of my favourite reviews ever. I think it's hilarious. Next is a film that came out last year. I've definitely spoken about this film a few times, and that is Oddity. A blind medium is set out to uncover the truth about the murder of her sister. She goes to stay with her sister's previous husband and his new partner, but brings a cursed wooden mannequin to help her solve the mystery. This genuinely has some really scary moments. It's super creepy throughout. It's definitely a good one to watch in the dark if you want to get a bit spooked. From the opening scene, you can see how creepy this film is going to be. It's one that really draws you in as it opens the film with a question and leaves you wondering. The film begins with a woman alone in her new secluded home. There isn't any furniture in there or anything yet, and a strange man comes to the door. He is acting a bit dodgy and seems a little bit scary. She doesn't open the door, but she talks to him through a small window. The man tells her that she needs to come outside because there is someone in the house and she's in danger danger, but obviously we don't know what to believe. We don't know if this man is just trying to get her to come outside so he can get to her, or if there is genuinely someone inside the house. We don't actually see what she chooses to do until the end of the film when it is all revealed. This is such a good opener because you are just left needing to know what happened with this encounter and how this woman ended up dying. The storyline is very engaging because you are kind of going along with the characters, trying to piece together and figure out for yourself what happened to this woman. My last recommendation is Speak No Evil from 2022. A Danish family meet a Dutch family on holiday and end up getting on really well, so they stay in touch. The plan is to meet again, so the Danish family travel to stay at the Dutch family's remote countryside home. After a few days, the hosts are acting weirder and weirder, so much so that it is getting uncomfortable, but the guests try to be polite and put up with it until they can't take much more, but they struggle to get out of this situation. Not to get confused with the, in my opinion, completely pointless remake in 2024. I really am not a fan of the remake. It's not a film that needed to be remade because it literally came out a few years ago, and for the most part it's in English anyway. I'm not going to get too much into the comparison and why I much prefer the original and all of that, because we'll be here all day. But if you haven't seen either, then definitely watch the original, and if you have seen the remake, then please watch the original because you really need to see how this story was first told. But be warned, the original is a lot more disturbing and gritty. This film has such a bleak storyline. It has such a feeling of dread throughout that just builds and builds. It really is an uncomfortable and disturbing watch. The final act is my favourite part because it is so crazy, it's so impactful, it's very disturbing and infuriating, but it is the part of the film that makes me feel the most emotions, which is incredible for a film to make you feel so much. Parts of this film are incredibly frustrating, but that is the point of this film. The meaning of this film is how people can just be compliant and put up with so much to be polite. I've just realised so many of the films on here are either disturbing or have some sad aspects, so I'm sorry about that. If I do a part 3, then I will be sure to add more light-hearted and happier recommendations. I do absolutely love when horror films delve into some deeper emotions like grief and trauma, which we have especially seen in the last decade. I love when horror explores these real-life dark topics in metaphorical ways because it is horror after all. The genre has always been relevant and reflective of what's going on in the real world and people's real lives. If you do watch any of these on this list, then I really hope you enjoy them. If you have any other Shudder recommendations, then please do let me know, and if you want more, then you can also check out my part 1. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another one soon.